On the way to work, traffic was slow, but my mind was spinning faster than ever. I already knew. Something inside me screamed that this was no ordinary day. When she left the house in the morning, the perfume was stronger than usual. The makeup looked meticulously well done for someone who was supposedly just going to work. And then came the shortcut excuse. A shortcut that made no sense at all. A path that never led to the company where she worked. But I had been suspicious for some time. Small details. Looks that were once full of love were now evasive. Kisses that no longer had the same intensity. Nights when she slept facing the opposite way, and a cell phone that was never left on the table, but rather kept, always with the screen facing down. I just needed proof. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. That's why, when she took that strange path, I didn't hesitate. I didn't honk, I didn't speed up. I just followed, keeping a safe distance. Every turn she made, every narrow street she took, my heart beat faster. I knew I was about to discover something that would change my life forever. But nothing could prepare me for what was to come. Because it's one thing to suspect. It's quite another to see the truth unfold before you, without any room for doubt. Her car stopped in front of a house. It wasn't just any house. It was one of those discreet, hidden places that seemed designed for encounters that should never be discovered. My breath caught in my chest. Should I get out of there? Should I pretend I didn't see anything? But it was already too late to turn back. Before I could rationalize any thoughts, I saw as the front door opened. A man appeared. High. Self-assured. And she. My God, she got out of the car smiling. Not just any smile. A smile I hadn't seen in years. A smile that was once mine. His hands shook on the steering wheel. My heart was racing so much I could feel it beating in my throat. They hugged. She threw herself into his arms as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if that hug were your home. As if everything we experienced together was nothing more than a distant memory, a faint echo of a past that no longer meant anything to her. There was no hesitation. There was no fear of being seen. That was where she wanted to be. It was there that she felt alive. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. Should I get out of the car? Should I wait? What if I was wrong? What if it was just a coworker? What if? I knew I was lying to myself. This was no casual encounter. It wasn't friendship. It was intimacy. It was desire. I needed to act. I got out of the car, felt the cold morning air hit my face. The distance between me and them seemed infinite, but with each step I took, my certainty grew. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a nightmare. It was raw, painful reality, unfolding before me without any filter. So I saw them up close. I saw the way she looked at him. The way he smiled at her. I saw his hands holding her waist, as if it were something normal. I saw her face glowing with happiness, a glow I hadn't seen in a long time. And it was there that everything inside me broke. They hadn't seen me yet. They were too immersed in each other to notice my presence. It was only when I got closer, when my shadow covered part of the sunlight, that their eyes met. First hers, a start, a mixture of shock and guilt. Then his, an expression of surprise that soon turned into something close to indifference. As if he had nothing to fear. As if I were just a momentary obstacle in their path. The silence between the three of us was suffocating. I could have screamed. It could have exploded in hatred, in anger, in promises of revenge. But my voice came out firm, without hesitation. Words that destroyed everything that existed there. Your hidden affair ends now. I want a divorce immediately. The impact was immediate. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled. She tried to stammer something, some justification, some weak excuse, but I didn't want to hear it. The man next to her said nothing, Maybe he didn't have the words, maybe he didn't care enough to speak. Perhaps because, at that moment, before anything else could be said, something unexpected happened. A turn of events I could never have predicted. Because what I didn't know was that I wasn't the only one there to make a confrontation. What I didn't know was that this story was far from over. Because before she could respond, before any of us could process the moment, a voice cut through the silence. A voice full of fury, coming from the opposite side of the street. A woman. And she wasn't there by chance. "So this is where you hide, bastard." The lover froze. His face lost all color. And then, finally, the truth came out. I wasn't the only one betrayed that day. And that was just the beginning. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, justify or romanticize betrayal. On the contrary, our fictional stories show how infidelity can destroy lives, ruin families and leave deep scars. Each story is a warning, every choice has consequences. Now get ready, because what you're about to hear is a shocking, intense and unforgettable story. Happy listening. The morning started like any other at Daniel and Emily's house. The sun entered timidly through the bedroom curtains, spilling a soft light onto the sheets that were still messy from the night before. The alarm clock had already rung a few minutes ago, but no one seemed willing to interrupt the comfortable silence of that start of the day. Emily turned over in bed slowly, her eyes still heavy with sleep, and found Daniel already awake, staring at the ceiling as if stuck in a distant thought. They had been together for more than 10 years, a couple who built a life based on complicity and mutual respect. Or at least that's what Daniel believed. He liked to think that his marriage was solid, resistant to the wear and tear of time, even though in the last few months things seemed different, almost imperceptible, but present in a way he couldn't exactly describe. Emily sighed and reached out her hand, touching her husband's arm lightly, an automatic gesture, but one that no longer carried the same intensity as before. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the touch, but when he opened them, he noticed that she was already walking away, throwing her legs off the bed and going straight to the bathroom without saying a single word. He remained there, motionless, listening to the sound of water running in the sink and his wife's small movements on the other side of the door. In the early years of marriage, mornings were different. She used to lie down on him, play with his hair and pull him in for a few more minutes in bed before they got up together. Now everything seemed mechanical. The good morning kiss was quick, the dialogues were short, and prolonged silences became more common than any meaningful conversation. But was that just the weight of time? Did every couple end up becoming like this after years together? He wanted to believe so, but something inside him was bothering him. Little details that appeared without warning and accumulated in his mind. Her cell phone, for example. Always there, always within reach, but inaccessible to him. Before, Emily left it on the table, unlocked, without any worries. Now it felt like an extension of his own body, protected by passwords he didn't know. When she received messages, she quickly glanced and turned the screen down. At first, he tried to ignore it. But what if something was happening that he didn't want to see? Emily left the bathroom already dressed, her hair slightly damp, and went to the closet without even exchanging a look with him. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face, trying to shake off that uncomfortable feeling. I didn't want to start the day like that. Maybe he was just paranoid. He got up, walked to the kitchen and started preparing coffee, a habit that became his over the years. He always appreciated small gestures, like making her cup ready before she arrived at the table. Emily appeared shortly after, sitting across from him and taking out her cell phone before even picking up the cup. He watched silently as she typed something quickly, her fingers gliding over the screen with familiarity. When he finished, he put the device aside and finally picked up the coffee. She smiled, but it was an automatic, rehearsed smile. "Thank you," she said, blowing on the hot liquid before taking a small sip. Daniel returned the smile, trying not to show that something inside him felt out of place. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, trying to make a simple conversation. She nodded, without taking her eyes off the cup. Yes, and you? He took a deep breath and nodded. Emily seemed satisfied with the short answer and turned her attention to breakfast. He wanted to ask more, he wanted to bring up some topic, but he felt that any attempt would be received with indifference. After a few minutes, she looked at the clock and got up. I need to go, I have an early meeting today, he said, hurriedly picking up his bag. Daniel nodded, watching her walk quickly across the kitchen. I'll go out a little later, he commented, just to see if she would react in any way. Emily paused for a moment, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Okay, he replied, without questioning the reason. And that was it. No kisses goodbye, no questions about the day's plans. Just a silence that hung in the air until the door closed behind her. Daniel sat there for a while, staring at the now lukewarm coffee. Something inside him told him there was an answer to all this change, but he still didn't know what it was. He decided to carry on with his day as usual. He went to work, greeted his colleagues, immersed himself in his tasks and tried, without much success, to shake off the restlessness that was growing inside him. However, throughout the day, his mind kept returning to Emily's expression that morning. For the calculated gestures, the smiles that seemed fake. That night, when he returned home, he found the living room empty. Emily hadn't arrived yet. He took off his shoes, loosened his tie and went to the kitchen, opening the fridge to get a beer. He sat on the sofa and turned on the television, trying to distract himself, but her absence at the usual time only increased his worry. He took out his cell phone and looked at the clock. Time passed and only after a few hours did the door open. Emily hurried in, taking off her shoes without looking at him. Did I take a while? He asked, his voice carrying a slight tension. Daniel watched her, noticing that she avoided meeting his gaze. Yes, it's late, he replied, trying to gauge her reaction. Emily forced a smile and walked to her room, dropping her bag on the chair. It was a long day, he commented, as if that were enough to justify everything. Daniel followed her with his gaze, noticing how she avoided any proximity. When she returned to the living room, she sat on the couch next to him, but without actually being there. His eyes were far away, his mind elsewhere. And you? How was your day? She asked, as if she had only just remembered to ask that question. He hesitated for a moment before answering, but realized that no matter what he said, she wasn't really listening. That night, lying next to her, Daniel stared at the dark ceiling, listening to Emily breathing beside him. I wanted to believe that this was all just a phase. That somehow things would go back to normal. But what if they didn't come back? What if that distance between them continued to grow, becoming an abyss impossible to cross? He didn't know the answers. But I felt like something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The days followed the same unsettling rhythm, a routine of calculated gestures, of absences disguised by banal excuses. Daniel tried to ignore the growing unease inside him, that nagging feeling that something was wrong, that Emily was no longer the woman he knew. Each morning began with the same silence, each night ended with the same invisible but palpable distance, a wall erected between the two without him understanding exactly when it had begun. He began to observe her more closely, noticing the details that had previously escaped him. Her cell phone was always protected, messages read quickly and deleted, constant delays at work that had never before been part of her routine. The calls answered in another room, the long showers before bed, as if he needed to erase traces of something he shouldn't discover. Emily no longer looked into his eyes as naturally as before, she looked away too quickly, as if she was afraid he might see something there. Daniel found himself in an anguish he didn't know, an uncertainty that gnawed at his insides. He didn't want to be the kind of paranoid husband, he didn't want to be someone who suspected without reason, but everything he saw screamed the same response inside him. Doubts turned into insomnia, thoughts accumulated in his mind like pieces of a puzzle that he still couldn't completely put together. That was when he made the decision that would change everything. He needed to know. He needed to see with his own eyes, because continuing in that state of uncertainty was slowly killing him. That morning, when Emily got up and said she needed to leave early for an important meeting, Daniel already knew what to do. He said goodbye with a cold kiss, waited for her to leave and, a few minutes later, took the car keys and followed her. He kept a safe distance, following every turn she made, feeling his heart speed up with every kilometer he covered. The final destination was not her office. He already knew it wouldn't be, but he still felt a tightness in his chest when he saw her car park in front of an unfamiliar house. It was a discreet residence, a place that didn't stand out, as if it had been chosen on purpose to go unnoticed. Daniel remained inside the car, watching. His hands were firmly on the steering wheel, his heart was racing, his eyes were fixed on the front door. He saw a man emerge from the entrance and Emily got out of the car with the same lightness as someone going to meet someone they love. Her smile was different. It wasn't a courteous smile, it wasn't a smile of convenience. It was the kind of smile you give when you are truly happy. The kind of smile that hadn't been directed at him in a long time. The pain came fast and hard, like a punch to the stomach. He watched in silence as Emily approached the man, her arms going around his body without hesitation. The hug lasted too long to be casual. Too long to be innocent. Daniel's blood boiled. He felt his entire body become rigid, he felt his chest burn, he felt a bitter taste rise to his throat. He blinked several times, as if it would somehow erase the scene before him, but it didn't disappear. It was there, real, irrefutable. Emily was cheating on him. His wife, the woman with whom he had shared years of life, was in the arms of another man, as if everything they had lived together meant nothing. Daniel felt his hands grip the steering wheel tightly. He wanted to get out of the car at that moment, he wanted to scream, he wanted to attack that man and pull him away. But it stopped. Shock kept him frozen in place. They entered the house together, without rushing, without fear of being seen. As if this were a regular meeting, as if there was no guilt, as if nothing could be discovered. Daniel remained there, motionless, trying to process the avalanche of emotions that hit him. The pain came in waves, mixed with anger, with indignation, with disbelief. He wanted not to believe it, he wanted to have some other explanation, but there was none. It was exactly what it looked like. His wife was having an affair. She was cheating on him and didn't even bother to hide it properly. Time passed and Daniel didn't know how long he stayed there. His chest rose and fell in short, irregular breaths. He wanted to act, he wanted to do something, but at the same time he felt tied to the seat, as if any movement would completely collapse everything that was left of him. But then, something inside him woke up. He couldn't just walk away as if nothing had happened. He was not a man who accepted being deceived. His mind worked fast now, pushing him forward, making every fiber of his body demand a response. Without hesitating any longer, Daniel opened the car door and got out. His heart beat like a drum as he walked to the entrance of the house, his steps firm, determined, filled with a purpose that could no longer be contained. He didn't know exactly what he would say when he saw Emily, but he knew he needed to confront her. I knew I couldn't leave without making it clear that this betrayal would not go without consequences. He took a deep breath. The doorbell rang. He heard footsteps on the other side. And then, the door opened. Emily appeared, surprised, her face immediately paling when she saw him standing there. Behind her, the man appeared, without any sign of guilt, as if Daniel's presence there was just a temporary inconvenience. The silence that fell was suffocating, filled with everything that didn't need to be said, because it was too obvious. Daniel didn't look away. He saw the fear in Emily's eyes, saw her uncertainty, saw the gears turning in her mind as she tried to understand how this had happened. But he wouldn't give her time. There would be no room for excuses or empty explanations. He spoke with a firmness that left no doubt about what would come next. Your hidden affair ends now. I want a divorce immediately. The impact of the words resounded in the air. Emily opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The man next to her didn't move a muscle. The moment was a watershed, the exact moment in which everything that existed between them was shattered. But what no one there knew was that this was just the beginning. Because there was something more that had not yet been revealed. Something that would change everything in ways none of them could have predicted. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Emily remained still, her face pale, her eyes wide, her words choked in her throat. The man next to her crossed his arms, maintaining a cold posture, without showing any reaction. Daniel kept his gaze steady, feeling fury throbbing in every part of his body. There were no more doubts, no more room for lies or cheap justifications. He had seen it with his own eyes, he had felt the betrayal that was unfolding before him without Emily even trying to hide it. But something was wrong. Something still didn't make sense. The discomfort on her face wasn't just guilt or shame. It was fear. A fear that grew every second, that spread like a silent fire, consuming the trust she had built with that man who, until a few minutes ago, seemed to be her safe haven. Daniel carefully observed the exchange of looks between the two. Emily was blinking rapidly, as if she was processing information she couldn't yet fully absorb. The other man, however, remained expressionless, his eyes blank, his mouth set in a tense line. Something inside Daniel snapped. He felt there was more to that scene than just an extramarital affair. And he was right. Before either of them could react, a voice echoed from behind Daniel, cutting through the air like a sharp blade. A voice filled with anger, with indignation, with something even deeper that he couldn't immediately identify. He turned instinctively and saw a woman standing there, her face contorted with fury, her eyes fixed on the man beside Emily. She didn't look at Daniel, nor at Emily. Her target was her lover, the man who now seemed, for the first time, truly uncomfortable. The silence was abruptly broken when the woman took a few steps forward, her fists clenched, her breathing uncontrolled. "So this is where you hide, bastard," she spat out the words in disgust, as if just saying them disgusted her. Emily froze, eyes jumping from the man's face to the woman who now stood in the eye of the storm. The man, in turn, finally showed a reaction. He took a step back, his expression closed, his jaw clenched. "But still, I didn't say anything." Daniel, still confused, looked from Emily to the woman who had just arrived, trying to piece together the pieces that were beginning to scatter before him. The answer came quickly, bluntly, without the slightest delicacy. "That man," the woman continued, pointing an accusing finger at him, "is my husband." The impact of those words hit Emily like a sharp blow. The color drained from his face, and his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes widened in disbelief, his lips quivered slightly. She shook her head, as if refusing to believe what she had just heard. But the other woman didn't stop. "Did you think you were the only one? Did you think you were special? You're just another one on the list." Her voice now trembled between anger and disappointment, between hatred and pain. "He does this all the time. I followed him this time because I already knew he had another one. But I never thought he would be such a naive woman." Venom dripped from each syllable, and Emily shuddered. Daniel watched the scene, feeling something inside him divide between the cruel satisfaction of seeing Emily taste her own medicine and the bitter compassion of realizing that, in the end, perhaps she too had been deceived. The woman continued, undeterred. "He's cheated on me before. Many times. And he always promises he'll stop. But he doesn't. He just finds another woman dumb enough to believe he's different." She laughed humorlessly, crossing her arms. "And apparently, this time, you were chosen." Emily finally reacted, her eyes filling with tears, her breathing quickening. "That can't be true. You're lying." But there was desperation in her voice, an urgent need to deny the truth that was already staring her in the face. The man next to him, who until then had remained silent, let out a long, heavy sigh, as if he were tired of the direction the situation was taking. He passed his hand over his face, an exhausted gesture, and finally opened his mouth. "Emily, I was going to tell you." But her voice was unsteady. "I had no conviction." And that was the final blow. Emily took a step back, as if she were going to fall. The ground beneath his feet seemed to have disappeared. Her eyes, which had once shone with security and desire when they were with him, were now filled with horror, with a dread that came not only from what she had done to Daniel, but from the revelation that, to this man, she meant nothing. She was just another pawn in his dirty game. Just another name on a list of betrayals. The woman next to Daniel laughed again, sarcastic, and then turned to him for the first time. "I bet you thought she was the worst person in this story," she said, shaking her head. "But it looks like everyone here has been tricked." Daniel didn't respond. He just watched, trying to process the mountain of information that unfolded every second. He didn't feel sorry for Emily. Not yet. But I felt something different. She felt that, at that moment, her punishment had arrived in a cruel and direct way. And he didn't have to do anything for that to happen. Emily looked at her lover, desperately searching for some sign that there was still something between them. But he didn't hold her gaze. He turned away, as if his presence there was already too heavy a burden to bear. As if his role in that scene was over. And in that moment, she knew. I knew I had lost everything. Her marriage, her husband, her dignity, and now, even the man she destroyed her family for. Silence once again dominated the environment, heavy and suffocating. Emily turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with a silent plea for forgiveness, but he remained expressionless. She didn't deserve forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. The woman next to him moved a little closer to her own husband, staring at him as if she hated him with every fiber of her being. "Let's see how you explain yourself this time," she said, before turning to leave. But before he left, he took one last look at Emily. "And you. I hope you learned your lesson." Emily collapsed, her shoulders slumped, her gaze blank, as she watched her world crumble around her. But for Daniel, that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because now, he knew that her betrayal wasn't just a passing mistake. It was a mistake that would ruin her forever. And he wanted to be there to watch every second of it happen. Daniel stood still, watching as the other woman walked away, pulling her cheating husband with her. The silence that remained in the air was piercing, as if each unspoken word weighed on Emily's shoulders, crushing her little by little. She was still there, motionless, her eyes fixed on nothing, as if she was still trying to process everything that had just happened. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling irregularly, and her trembling hands clutched her sides, as if looking for some anchor to prevent her from collapsing completely. Daniel didn't say anything. It didn't need to. He had already said everything that mattered, and the rest was clear in his own eyes. The contempt, the disappointment, the absolute end of any trace of love he once felt for her. Emily tried to say something, opened her mouth once, twice, but no sound came out. Her eyes turned to him, full of desperation, and she finally managed to stammer out, her voice breaking, almost a whisper. I didn't know. I swear, Daniel. I never imagined. But he interrupted her with an icy look, his lips pressed together, his jaw clenched. "Do you want me to feel sorry for you?" The words came out low, dangerously controlled. Emily blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill over. "No, I." Her voice trailed off, and she squeezed her eyes shut, as if to shake off the weight of shame, of humiliation that was now bearing down on her. "I just wanted you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." Daniel laughed, a short, humorless laugh, a bitter sound that reverberated through the empty space between them. "You never wanted to hurt me?" He took a step forward, approaching her, his eyes fixed on hers, forcing her to hold his gaze. "You lied to me. You deceived me. And worse, you threw away everything we built because of a man who didn't even care about you. And now you want me to believe that you never wanted to hurt me? She trembled, her shoulders slumping a little, as if her strength was slipping away. I know I was wrong, Daniel. I know I did something unforgivable. But I didn't want it to be like this. He crossed his arms, his expression still hard. And how exactly did you want it to be? For me to never find out? For you to keep sneaking out, living two lives, looking me in the eye every day while lying without a hint of guilt? The pain in his voice was visible, mixed with anger, with contempt, with everything he tried to contain, but which overflowed despite his efforts. Emily sobbed, bringing her hands to her face, and Daniel felt a brief moment of satisfaction at seeing her in that state. But it didn't last long. Because, deep down, he knew that none of that would change what had already been done. The wind blew cold around them, a reminder that they were there, standing in front of that house that now seemed smaller, more insignificant, a stage for lies and illusions that no longer belonged to him. He took a deep breath, feeling the pressure in his chest increase. I could have done anything for you, Emily. I could have fought for our marriage. But you didn't even give me that chance. You left me without hesitation, without a second thought. And now that everything has fallen apart, do you want to tell me you're sorry? She let out a louder sob, the pain evident in every feature of her face. I got lost, Daniel. I don't know what happened to me. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes dark with a coldness she had never seen before. You know exactly what happened. You made choices. And now you're going to live with the consequences of them. Without another word, he turned and began to walk away. Emily stepped forward, holding out her hand, as if to stop him from going. Daniel, please listen to me. But he didn't stop. He didn't look back. Every step he took was a release, a breaking of chains he didn't even know were there, a weight lifting off his shoulders that had been carried for too long. He got into the car and slammed the door, starting the engine without hesitation. Emily was still there, standing on the sidewalk, tears flowing freely now, her lips trembling in despair. But he didn't allow himself to feel anything for her at that moment. What was left of them had died there, at that moment, in front of that house. And there was no turning back. The road unfolded before him, and he drove aimlessly for a while, letting his mind empty, the pain settle in a less suffocating way. He didn't want to go home. Not yet. Everything there smelled like her presence permeated the furniture, the walls, the memories that were now nothing more than shadows of what once was. He stopped at a small, almost empty bar and sat at the counter, ordering a strong drink. The first sip burned his throat, but it was exactly what he needed. Just feel something different. Just step away, for a moment, from the crushing weight of that betrayal. It was then that he realized that someone was watching him. A woman sitting a few chairs away, her eyes curious but not intrusive. He held her gaze for a moment, not knowing exactly what he felt. She smiled, a light smile, without pretension, just a gesture of recognition, perhaps a silent understanding that he was not there by chance. Daniel looked away, but for some reason, he felt that, perhaps, this was the first time in a long time that he had seen a real smile. And that, for now, was enough. He finished his drink, paid the bill and left, feeling that, despite everything, something inside him was changing. The anger was still there, the pain was still sharp, but there was something more now. A freedom he didn't know he needed. A certainty that, no matter how bad everything had been, he was leaving, moving on. And Emily? She would be left behind, trapped in her own destruction, living the consequences of her choices. The night stretched out before him, open, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt that maybe there was something beyond the pain. Maybe there would be a fresh start. Maybe, just maybe, that betrayal wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel drove aimlessly, feeling the weight of the silence around him like a suffocating presence. The city passed in blurred flashes through the car windows, and his mind oscillated between emptiness and an avalanche of thoughts that refused to give a break. The bitter taste of betrayal was still in his mouth, a taste that not even the strong drink he had had at the bar could erase. Everything seemed to mix together in a whirlwind of contradictory sensations: anger, frustration, relief, sadness, and most of all, that strange feeling that, somehow, he still hadn't fully processed what had happened. Emily was no longer his wife, at least not really. The bond that once united them had been shattered in such a brutal way that there wasn't even a fragment left that could be mended. And now? What would happen next? How do you continue after something like this? He parked the car in any spot, turning off the engine and letting the silence of the night envelop him. He ran his hands over his face, trying to find a semblance of calm amidst the internal chaos that was spreading inside him. The marriage he had built so carefully, the years shared, the memories, everything seemed distant now, as if it belonged to another life, to another man who was no longer him. He wondered if Emily was still in that house, if she was still in shock, if she was still trying to understand how her own life had fallen apart in a matter of minutes. But thinking about her sickened him. Thinking about the look of despair she gave him before he left didn't awaken compassion in him, only the realization that she finally felt the weight of the consequences of her actions. The problem was that she felt it too late. He picked up his cell phone, hesitating for a moment before opening the contact list. His lawyer had already made it clear that the divorce process would be quick, and Daniel didn't want to delay anything. Every second he spent still married to Emily was a second wasted on something that was already dead. He typed a short, to-the-point message instructing the lawyer to proceed immediately. As soon as he pressed the send button, he felt a strange momentary peace. As if that simple act had somehow given him back some of the control he had lost. But then the inevitable question arose. And now? What to do? Where to go? The house that was once his refuge was now a minefield of memories he didn't want to face. He could get a hotel, but the idea of being alone in an unfamiliar room didn't appeal to him. He needed a place that reminded him that there was still something beyond the hell he was living through. He found himself driving again, without really having a fixed destination, until, without realizing it, he parked in front of an old friend's apartment. There were few people in the world he considered close enough to reach out to them at a time like this, and Lucas was one of them. Without thinking twice, he got out of the car and rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened, revealing his friend's surprised face. Lucas took a moment to assimilate his presence, but one look was enough to understand that something was very wrong. Daniel didn't need to say anything, he just let out a heavy sigh, and that was enough for Lucas to step aside, making room for him to enter. The apartment was a stark contrast to the turmoil going on in Daniel's mind. Everything there was organized, calm, as if nothing in the world had been shaken. He sat on the couch, resting his elbows on his knees and staring at the floor. Lucas sat next to her, crossing his arms, waiting. He knew he didn't need to rush anything, that his friend would speak when he was ready. And Daniel finally spoke, each word coming out like a weight he needed to lift from within himself. He told everything, from his suspicions to the exact moment he caught Emily in the act. He told her about the other woman, about the unexpected turn of events, about the humiliation he felt when he realized that Emily had been betrayed by her own lover. He told everything without censorship, without trying to soften the pain that still burned inside him. Lucas remained silent for a while, absorbing every detail. Then, he took a deep breath, resting his hands on his knees and looking at Daniel with a serious look. "You did what you had to do, man. There's nothing you could have done differently." The statement was simple, but it carried enormous weight. Daniel nodded slowly, feeling validated in a way he didn't even know he needed. But still, the uneasiness persisted. He could have gotten rid of Emily, but he still didn't know how to get rid of the weight he carried inside him. The conversation went on for a while longer, and Lucas, realizing that his friend needed a little distraction, suggested that they go out for a drink in a different place, away from any memories that could pull him back into the emotional chaos in which he was trapped. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but ended up agreeing. He didn't want to spend the whole night alone, mulling over every detail of what happened. He needed to get out, breathe, remember that the world kept turning, regardless of everything. The bar was cozy, not very busy, and the music in the background was low enough so they could talk without having to shout. Daniel felt a little lighter there, like he was, if only for a brief moment, moving away from the pain. He took a sip of his drink, letting the alcohol warm his chest, and allowed himself to relax a little. It was then that he noticed a familiar presence on the other side of the counter. The same woman who observed him earlier, the same one who gave him a discreet smile in the other bar. Now, she was there again, sitting alone, absent-mindedly fiddling with the glass in front of her. Daniel stared at her for a moment, trying to understand if this was just a coincidence or if the universe was sending him some kind of strange signal. Lucas noticed his gaze and followed the direction, arching an eyebrow. "Someone you know?" Daniel shrugged, still uncertain. "I don't think so. But we've bumped into each other before." Lucas smiled sideways. "Maybe it's a sign." Daniel laughed, for the first time in a long time feeling something close to lightness. "Perhaps." He picked up his glass, took another sip and decided he didn't need to rush. For the first time since everything happened, he felt like there might still be something beyond the end. That, maybe, just maybe, that story wouldn't end with him broken forever. But he also knew there was still a long way to go. And the real question now was, would I be ready to move on? The night progressed, and Daniel felt that, little by little, something inside him began to change. It wasn't exactly relief, but rather a strange acceptance. Emily's betrayal, the shock of the confrontation, the humiliation of discovering that she herself had been deceived, everything was still there, but it no longer weighed in the same way. He still didn't know if this was the beginning of healing or just the effect of alcohol mixing with tiredness. The bar was quieter now, some people leaving, others still deep in their own conversations, and he remained sitting next to Lucas, watching the woman he had seen earlier. She seemed relaxed, oblivious to the fact that she had crossed his path twice in the same day. But then, in an almost imperceptible movement, she lifted her eyes and met his. There was a moment of hesitation, as if she was trying to decide whether to maintain that contact or simply avoid it. But she didn't dodge. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a simple gesture but full of meaning. Daniel found himself making a decision without thinking too much. He took the glass, took one last sip of the drink and, without looking at Lucas, got up and walked towards her. As he approached, the woman raised an eyebrow, assessing him curiously. He hesitated for a second before speaking. "I think we've seen each other before." His voice was huskier than she expected, but she just smiled lightly, playing with the rim of her glass. "Twice in one day. Seems more than coincidental." Her tone was unconcerned, but there was something about the way she watched him that made it clear she wasn't the type to believe in chance. Daniel pulled out the chair in front of him and sat down, trying to ignore the fact that it had been too long since he started a conversation with a woman other than Emily. "Daniel." He introduced himself, holding out his hand. She looked at his hand for a moment before clasping it, the fingers firm, the skin warm. "Sophie." There was a brief silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She watched him carefully, as if trying to decipher something in him before he even said anything relevant. Daniel realized he didn't want to make small talk. "I didn't want to pretend that that night was just another night." He knew something inside him was different, and as much as he tried to avoid it, he needed to be honest. It was a difficult day. He admitted, without going into details. Sophie didn't seem surprised. Instead of asking directly, she tilted her head and said, "I can see it in your eyes." He smiled, humorless. "That obvious?" She shrugged, taking a sip of her drink. "Not everyone sees it, but I'm good at it. You're in the middle of something big, something that messed up everything you thought was right. He let out a sigh, running a hand over his face. What about you? Did something big happen to you being here alone? Sophie turned the glass on the table thoughtfully. Let's say I'm at the end of something that should have ended a long time ago. Daniel didn't ask anything else. He knew that when someone was willing to speak, they would speak in their own time. And Sophie seemed to understand this too, because she didn't press for more details about whatever was going on with him. They just stood there, drinking, talking about everything and nothing at the same time, and for the first time that day, he felt like he could breathe. When he finally realized the time, it was already past midnight. Lucas, who seemed pleased to see him interacting with someone without carrying that expression of pure weariness, just waved from afar, getting up to pay the bill. Do you have anywhere to go? Sophie asked, when she noticed him absent-mindedly looking at his watch. Daniel laughed lightly, without responding immediately. Technically, yes. But I don't know if I want to go home right now. She nodded, understanding. I know what it's like. She picked up her bag, placing a note on the table before standing up. If you want to continue the conversation, there's a 24-hour cafe a few streets away. The coffee isn't the best in the world, but it's enough for the expense. Daniel hesitated, just for a moment, before realizing he didn't want the night to end there. He stood up too, putting his wallet in his pocket. I think a coffee is a good idea. The diner was one of those places that seemed to exist in a separate universe, where time passed differently and the people who entered always seemed to be seeking refuge from something. The smell of strong coffee and burnt pancakes filled the air, and the few people there seemed as out of place as he felt. Sophie chose a table near the window, and Daniel sat opposite her, watching the way she fidgeted with the thin ring she wore on her finger, turning it over and over. Is it a habit or does it have a meaning? He asked, indicating the ring. Sophie looked at the silver piece, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. It means it took me too long to get out of something that was already over. He didn't need any further explanation. Sophie was also dealing with her own battles, and somehow, that made the conversation between them flow with an unexpected naturalness. She talked about a relationship that deteriorated until it became unsustainable, about how she tried to convince herself that she could fix something that was already in ruins. Sometimes we hold on to something so much that we think it's still worth it, but when we finally let go, we realize we were holding on to a ghost. Daniel nodded, understanding the feeling better than he would have liked. And when we realize it, we've wasted so much time that it seems like it's too late to start over. Sophie let out a sigh, stirring her coffee without actually drinking it. But it's never too late. He was silent for a while, thinking about the weight of that sentence. It's never too late. Was it true? Could he still start over, despite everything that had happened? Would, at some point, Emily's betrayal become just a distant detail, something that no longer defined him? He didn't know. But for the first time, he felt that maybe it was possible. The conversation continued until the sky began to change color, announcing the sunrise. Daniel was surprised to realize how much time had passed, and even more so to notice that he didn't feel the same weight as before. Sophie looked at him with a slight smile. It was a pleasure meeting you, Daniel. Even under the strange circumstances in which this happened. He returned the smile, feeling something genuine there. It was my pleasure. When they said goodbye, he felt that, for the first time since everything happened, something inside him was moving. He still didn't know where it would take him, but one thing was certain, he was no longer stuck in the past. There was something ahead. Something new. Something that, perhaps, would be worth discovering. Time passed and, with it, the wounds that seemed impossible to heal began to close. Daniel completely distanced himself from Emily, ignoring every attempt she made to reverse the irreversible. The messages she sent went unanswered, calls were ignored, and any trace of the life they shared was erased with each document signed in the divorce proceedings. He didn't want to hear excuses, he didn't want to hear about regret, about confusion, about mistakes that, in the end, weren't mistakes at all but deliberate choices. Emily tried everything, from desperate words to calculated silences, hoping that somehow he would reach out to her. But Daniel never looked back. Her betrayal wasn't just an isolated act, it was the complete shattering of something he could never rebuild. And deep down, maybe she knew that from the beginning. The divorce went through faster than Emily expected, and when she realized that she was, in fact, alone, reality hit her harder than the betrayal itself revealed. The man she had risked everything for disappeared from her life without so much as a last look, without an apology, without any acknowledgement that she meant anything to him. The other woman, his wife, made a point of exposing everything publicly, making Emily's life hell in social circles, at work, everywhere she went. She became the subject of whispered conversations in the hallways, the woman who let herself be deceived by her own lover, who destroyed her home only to discover that she was never special. Loneliness swallowed her in a way she didn't expect, because unlike Daniel, who still had his dignity, she had nothing left. He left her in the past, and the past was the only thing left for her to relive. The shame was overwhelming, and she tried to move on, to rebuild what she had destroyed, but everything seemed to fall apart before it even began. Guilt gnawed at her insides, and she began to avoid places where she could see familiar faces. She was fired from her job shortly after, as her tarnished reputation became a nuisance to the company. He tried to seek support from friends, but realized that the betrayal alienated not only Daniel, but everyone around him. The emptiness became unbearable. She tried for a long time to find someone to blame other than herself, but in the end, there was no one. Just the wrong choices that got her there. While Emily was heading down the slope of her own undoing, Daniel was walking a completely different path. He finally allowed himself to live without carrying the weight of the past. The sleepless nights remembering what happened were behind us, and life began to have a new meaning. Sophie became a constant presence, someone who appeared at a time when everything seemed uncertain, but who, somehow, made him see that there was still much more to live for. The connection between the two grew naturally, without rush, without urgency, just the lightness of someone who understood what it's like to start over after having been broken. She wasn't a replacement, she wasn't an escape, and maybe that was exactly why things started to make sense. He discovered that love was not limited to broken promises and that it was possible to rebuild something from scratch without the ghosts of the past interfering. The lonely nights were replaced by conversations that flowed until dawn, by laughs he didn't know he was still capable of letting out. Sophie had a light way of seeing the world, but she was not naive. She knew he needed time, and she gave it. He knew she had her scars too, and he never pressed. And so, without realizing it, they became part of each other's lives in a way that neither of them expected. It was a slow but genuine process, and when Daniel realized it, he no longer saw himself carrying the chains of the past. Emily's betrayal was no longer the center of her story. He was no longer a betrayed man, but a free man. And as he moved forward, Emily sank deeper and deeper. One day, she tried calling him again, even though she knew she probably wouldn't get an answer. But this time, the number no longer existed. The line had been cut, as had any hope she still harbored that he would forgive her one day. And it was at that moment that she understood, with the painful clarity of someone who had lost everything, Daniel had not just left, he had erased her from his life. She no longer existed for him. And at that moment, I knew that this was the greatest punishment I could receive. Each one followed their destiny. Daniel found a new beginning, while Emily was stuck in a past she could never change. Life took its toll on each person for their choices, and in the end, her greatest punishment was not losing her marriage, but losing herself. He, on the other hand, not only survived, but was reborn. And that, in the end, was the real revenge. Now, I want to know your opinion on this story. What did you think of the twist? Do you think Emily deserved what happened to her? Leave your comment below, I want to know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. And remember, betrayal never leads to a happy ending. Until next time.